and I'll give you the key. It's easy. Just keep on hopping, keep on rocking, and don't start stopping. It's everything you need just to walk the scene. And if you wanna make it better, you give it to me, I'll grease it. I believe for you, you wouldn't believe what I see in you. So don't stop, don't let the dream drop hop. Hold up and make it lovely, make it real, and make it yours. Don't stop.
All right, Aram, super excited to have you coming on the podcast. We've chatted back and forth quite a bit. Krista, she connected us, and it's funny because we were both at Swiss too, and we just missed each other. We didn't even get to meet in person, but I saw you scootering around plenty, and then now I put two and two together, and I was like, oh, he was the guy on the scooter.
Yeah, it was my eye walk, my pirate's leg that I was bouncing around on, which has now been off for 2.5 weeks.
Which is probably feels great considering you were on like a conference run there for a bit and having to do it all with one leg.
Well, it's gonna suck now that I don't get any special concessions at the airport anymore. I might just throw the boot back on and put the leg back on for when I fly.
Nice.
Why not? I mean, everybody else has special accommodations for bullshit. I might as well have it too.
Well, that's like the new one. Is it Southwest Airlines says if you have a shoulder width over 17 inches, you can get 2 seats, one for free, and it's geared towards the people of size, right? But how many bodybuilders do you know that they're freaking giant and they're sitting in there all wedged in? I'm sure they're probably not going to get that treatment.
So I wonder. I was actually thinking about the other day. I was going to start a conversation on Instagram about it because I wanted to just see how many Karens were going to come out of the woodwork and fuck with me about it. But that's an excellent point, right? Because how many male bodybuilders specifically are probably as wide as your general fat guy?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to get the same concession. They might, I doubt it, but now we're not like the word fat is apparently offensive, even though it's literally what the word is. Like there's fat in food and there's fat in your body. It's a physiological and scientific term, but that apparently is offensive. But it's not offensive to get yourself to a place where you're so big that you have to take up that much more space on an airplane. And now other people have to suffer because of it and then not be able to get the same treatment as you.
Mm-hmm.
And I dealt with this when I was hobbling around on my leg. I was my whole life is like, I don't want to make anybody else's life impacted because of my existence. So I want to inconvenience people as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got on the plane, I'm like, listen, I'll sit in the back seat all the way by the toilet. Is it possible if you guys aren't in a full flight, can I get my own seat my own row so I could throw my leg up? Because I'm fresh out of surgery. My inflammation is through the roof. My leg is twice its size. I just need to be able to elevate intermittently throughout the flight. And like one flight, the lady was like, yes, absolutely, no problem. And then 2 other flights, they were like, absolutely not. And I looked at the flight, it wasn't full. They could have done it. But it's like, it's just this idea of fair versus unfair versus like, is it laziness that causes obesity, or is it physiological, or is it psychological, or is it socioeconomical? Like, I don't care what it is anymore, but at some point we all have to become a little bit less sensitive to verbiage, and we have to become more self-aware of ourselves and be okay with whatever the terminology is, because it's just terminology. And like, if words offend you that much, then stay the fuck home.
Yeah. Well, and that's been a thing lately, honestly. People, I think, are just waiting to get their feelings hurt. That is kind of the society that we're living in. I think somebody got after me on Instagram the other day over a post I had made over weight loss drugs, right? And I said, hey, she owns a med spa. I think it was maybe one of William Grizone's things. And she owns a med spa. And she's like, no, medically in the trials, this and that and this and the other. And I said, okay. I said, well, we can agree to disagree, because I do anywhere from 200 to 500 freaking cases a year, just consultation. All of a sudden in this last year, I'm seeing lots of people that got a lot of big problems coming out of that. So clinically, can it be used in a good way? I'm sure there are ways. We know it. Okay. You lose weight, you get healthier, but it's being prescribed to people that aren't even in a critically healthy place. You know, when a 160-pound, 5'6" female goes on it to binge, basically go on like a crash diet, they're like, oh yes, we can give this to you, it's just fine. It's being given to people in the incorrect context. And she's saying, oh, but it can even help with your brain health. And she's like trying to sell it to everybody, right? And I'm like, listen, I said, you can stick with your medical, what you think the studies are. I said, I'm seeing this stuff in real life, and I'm seeing what's going on every single level. And so we can agree to disagree. I said, it's already proof that coaching is 20 years ahead of the scientific studies when it comes to a lot of this stuff, because we have all of our stuff in the game. So anyway,
Yeah, and we're essentially assembling our own evidence. Like every
Right.
coach that keeps any type of data. I mean, that I think I said this on a podcast once. Like, I wish like all the good coaches in the industry could just compile their data for the however many years they've been coaching and just submit it blindly to some research facility that will then comb through it and then just pull out all these and extrapolate all these different theses and hypotheses. I feel like we would be on the forefront of something huge, because we would figure we would reinforce that the law of thermodynamics is real and calories matter. And we would also reinforce the fact that most people that aren't weight loss resistant, they're just non-compliant.
Right.
And that the percentage of people that actually are not losing weight due to weight loss resistance or hormonal issues is so small and so statistically insignificant that to say that the reason why you're not losing weight is because you're not eating enough becomes one of the dumbest statements on the planet. Like, I'm sorry, it just is. Like, if anybody's been on Earth for long enough and anybody says that I was told that I don't lose weight because I'm not eating enough, how much physical exertion and stress are you under that
Right.
truly is, and how methodically are you under eating?
Yeah, well, so and that's a great bridge for this. So we're coming into New Year's resolution time, and the fitness and weight loss current climate has gotten really interesting, right? You've got people that are saying, oh, well, you can still enjoy everything that you ever wanted to and lose weight, and it doesn't have to be difficult, and there can be balance, and there's this and that. Then you got people saying, no, you got to do cardio 6 days a week, you've got to eat in a caloric deficit, and then you have people that are kind of in the middle where they're like, okay, well, let's kind of like you and I, let's examine the psychology of this, but also have some realistic expectations, right? And kind of learning the person as an individual, because there really is no, I mean, you work with hundreds of people, there really is no clear-cut way. Everybody's a little bit different, and that's where good coaching comes in. But so let's dive into what it looks like for some of these people that are just going to be getting started. How do they set realistic expectations and kind of meet themselves where they're at too?
Most importantly, just like kind of respect your starting point, like understand what you know and what you don't know, and like what you're good at, what you're not good at. I think a lot of people need to really kind of look at themselves in the mirror and ascertain whether or not they need specific interventions. Like, people don't need to diet until they can actually determine that they have some type of a meal structure first. Like, I think establishing a meal structure and a frequency that's consistent on a daily basis and then measuring the efficacy of that would probably be number one. Like, food is always going to be number one. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I know that people like it's 20% training and 80% nutrition. I think it's like 100% nutrition. And if you're so athletically inclined or aesthetically inclined, then the training becomes that much more important. Yes, we want strength. Yes, we want muscle. But if we just don't want to be fat, then that's just, you can do that purely with food. And walking, really. I mean, we wouldn't need to train ever. But if you obviously want to have some muscle mass and some strength and prevent sarcopenia and enhance bone mineral density and all that kind of stuff, yes, we do want to strength train. But like, determine whether or not you even have a structure, because most people, like, if you were just to walk around your average daily park and you stopped every single person you walked by and asked them, how many meals a day do you eat? How much protein do you consume? What's a carb? Bread. What's a fat? Oil. What's a protein? Chicken. And you're just going to get a lot of these like manufactured cookie cutter answers with not much understanding underlying belief behind it. So that would be the first place I'd start if somebody was brand new to this. I'm sure that most of your listeners are probably not wet behind the ears entering into this place without any prior knowledge of anything whatsoever. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more intermediate. If you're an intermediate person listening, this is probably categorizing you properly. You got a couple of years of training under your belt. You've probably followed a program or two. You probably know what a macro is. You probably understand where to get protein, carbs, and fats from. Now we have to like determine whether or not you're actually consistent with the knowledge that you have. Are you practicing this stuff 25 out of 30 days a month versus 18 out of 30 days a month? Because that's a massive difference. I think people have these expectations of results, but they're also doing it with the belief system that I can still have my whatever weekends and they're not going to have any impact on me whatsoever. And I'm your perfect example. I can maintain my weight at 3,000 calories. Most of the people that are listening to this, if you're a female let's just say if you're a female and you're not a bodybuilder, you're probably not maintaining weight at 3,000 calories. You're probably sitting at somewhere between 14 and 1,900. Or let's let's say if it's somebody who's consistent, who's been doing this for a while, let's even call it 2,200. It is very easy to overconsume calories when that's your budget. And I think I proved it this weekend. So, basically I was in a deficit for the week because my coach had me on lower calories just to kind of resensitize the system a little bit. I was isocaloric for like 3 months after my injury. So isocaloric just means you ate the same amount of calories every day. And he's just like, let's bring things down. We're going to bring protein to 275 from 250. So it was a 25 gram increase there. We dropped carbs from like 300 to 185, and we dropped fat from 75 to 50. So low fat, moderate carb, high protein. And it was challenging, to be honest. Like, it wasn't easy for me I had to move around the pieces of the chessboard a little bit. I had to like bring protein to a place where it was a little bit leaner. So I don't normally eat chicken. I'd eat more chicken, no eggs, had to do strictly egg whites and egg beaters, tuna fish, deli meat, stuff like that, protein powder, a little bit of red beef, but like 96.4 ground and only once a day because otherwise it would blow my fat out. So it was challenging. But then on the weekend, got a tin of cookies that was delivered to the house on Friday, which I ended up eating half of, so let's call it about 250 grams of chocolate chip cookies, which if you log that in a chronometer, it's about 1,700 calories. So that was easily a blowout day. Then Saturday got Mediterranean food for takeout at night for dinner, which was calorically controlled, but quality wise, definitely way too much oil. And that fucked me up digestively for the next day. So that's another meal out. And then Sunday, planned pizza night on Sunday night, but prior to that, out and about with the dogs, stopped and got half of a salmon salad and then split a breakfast flatbread that had like short ribs on it, a little bit of cheese, some kind of a creamy sauce that was lightly drizzled on. It wasn't a messy sauce. And then some eggs. Tried to quantify all that because I'm pretty I make a game out of tracking food. Like, I think some people are so obsessed with this idea of either being perfect or this is so annoying. I just find it to be fun because like I want to see what a blowout of cookies looks like.
Yeah.
I want to see what like splitting 2 10-inch pies and 6 chicken wings and all that stuff equates to. So I, conservatively estimated as well as I could. And after 10 years of tracking food, my estimation has gotten relatively decent. So I estimated like a 4,500 calorie day yesterday, also some ice cream and a gluten-free brownie on top of that. So let's say that you ate that as a woman who's maintaining weight at 1,700 calories. Well, you just now went from 1,700 to 4,500, essentially 3 days in a row. Like, let's not say maybe 4,500 the second day, but let's say it was 3,000. And let's say the first day with cookies was another 3,500. So now what you thought was a deficit or what you thought was maintenance just turned into a surplus. And you're doing that weekend after weekend after weekend, and you're stuck and you don't understand why the scale is slowly, but still creeping up. And you're starting to notice that like things are just slipping out of control. And it's purely just because of that. And I know that people don't want to hear that because that is a shitty thing to have to think of. Like, oh, well, I'm going to lose my dinners out, or I'm going to lose my lunches with my friends, or I'm not going to be able to have these boozy brunches that I enjoy. For some time, you won't be able to because you have to pick a lane. Like, you can't say that I want to lose fat and I want to feel my best, but I also want to do it however I feel like doing it.
Right.
There has to be some guardrails up and some barriers up and some control. And there needs to be a level of unbalance until you can find some balance. And I think balance is one of those things that ends up being earned over time.
Absolutely. And I think we can take that one step further. And I'd love your take on this, but people will actually get the weight off and they'll be in a maintenance phase and they'll be able to have some more meals out here and there, but then they don't right off the bat gain weight. So then they start making excuses. They're like, well, that didn't hurt me, so I'm going to continue to eat out every single day of the week. And next thing you know, they've fallen back into their old habits because they kind of just got there gradually because they allowed themselves that extra, they made that excuse for themselves, right? Like, oh, it was okay this time, so I'm going to keep going. And they end up back in the place where they were at instead of being in a balanced place to just keep cruising in that lane. You know what I'm saying?
And that's where I think the lifestyle part is so important, because I battle with this too. I mean, I live in San Diego. It's 4 o'clock right now. The sun is shining. If I was to go down towards the beach, everybody be outside having cocktails, eating tacos, doing the chip thing. And most of my friends here will do that. Like, I don't have a lot of fitness friends in San Diego. I have a lot of party friends in San Diego, and they're going out to dinner 3-4 times a week. They're having drinks multiple nights a week. They're living like your normal American lifestyle, right? Like, I'm not thinking about fitness or nutrition. So I think where I heard this the best was when I was on Dave Tate's Table Talk podcast. Funny enough, I'm wearing the shirt. When I was on Dave's podcast, he had said that most of my audience, one of their top four or two of their top four priorities are training and nutrition. If you were to ask your average American, what are your top 3 or 4 priorities? I don't think nutrition and training would be on that list. I think it would be like my job, my family. Like, what are you thinking about on an average day basis? And for me, like, I'm thinking about, what does my next meal look like? What time can I get into the gym today between these hours and these hours, between phone calls, between work? Like, I'm thinking about that stuff actively. Whereas I think most of our clients and most of the people that we try to help are not established in that way, because that's not their lifestyle. So they have to actually start to think in those terms. And that is very overwhelming, and that can be very cumbersome because there's no immediate result, right? It's like, I went from not ever thinking about fitness and nutrition to thinking about nutrition and fitness a lot, to the point where I'm actually logging my food now too, but yet my body hasn't changed all that much. It's like, well, yeah, because you spent 20 years not thinking about it. And now you spent 3 weeks thinking about it. So now you got to spend another 3 years thinking about it. And then maybe you'll start to see something in the mirror that will resemble what you had in your head. But very often those two things are not reconciled because the realistic expectations just aren't there. It's like, people forget that it took them however many years to unravel, or they neglected the amount of years that they just didn't think about stuff, or maybe they let other things take priority, which is fine. And I will never blame weight increase on, I just don't give a shit. Because I think most people, if you ask them, like, do you care about how you look and feel? I think most people will say yes. And fat people don't need to be reminded that they're fat. Like, they get it. They brush by mirrors every day. They know they're big, but they stay fat because they haven't changed their identity. They haven't changed the systems in place. And people become unhealthy and gain weight because they don't have systems in place, and because it stops being a priority. In very rare cases, and I'm sure you'd agree, in very rare cases, is it truly something chemical or internal physically that is causing that to happen? Like, yes. Is it possible? Sure. Is that the reason why you specifically are now 30 pounds heavier? Is it more menopause, or is it because of your hormones? No, it's not. I'm sorry. Like, I would need to see an insurmountable amount of evidence to be able to show me that that was the case.
Well, and I think I made a post about this the other day, right? Because people are like, oh, well, I have hypothyroidism and that's why I can't lose weight. And I said, actually, I'm going to flip this around. Do you have hypothyroidism because you're overweight? Because you don't just instantly develop a condition for no reason. It happened for a reason. And so a lot of these people that are blaming hormone dysfunction, and I'm not discounting what's going on here, I'm just being real. A lot of these people that are blaming hormone dysfunction and thyroid and all this stuff for the reason they gain weight, oftentimes they gained those symptoms and those imbalances from being overweight and poor lifestyle habits. So, and that could be a hard thing, but everybody's, again, very sensitive, looking for a way out. And at this point, sometimes you got to be real with yourself and be like, okay, this is when I'm ready to make a change. And nothing's going to change if I don't change my poor habits that are in place.
It's hard because, again, like, let's say let's say you worked your ass off. I use this example with one of my clients today. I said, if somebody told you that in the next 3 months, if you were to work 90 hours a week, you would get a 3-time pay increase and your workload would get cut down to 25 hours a week, you wouldn't see the light of day for the next 3 months. You'd be in the office 90 hours a week. You would tell your husband to go fuck himself. You would be an absentee mother. And you'd be like, for the next 3 months, if I could just dial it in for 90 days straight, I know that there's this light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, with nutrition and fitness interventions, they don't happen like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you could be dialed in. Like, I know people that have been super spot on, strict for 90 days straight. Marginal changes occurred, almost barely recognizable changes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're somebody who's 300 pounds and you change your life like that drastically in 90 days, you'd probably be down 50 pounds.
Yeah.
But if you're a 140, 50, 60, 70 pound woman and you're holding on to a little bit of body fat that you determined to be this awful amount of weight, which it really isn't, you're not going to see that much of a difference in 90 days of pure nothing but unadulterated compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So the expectations of results are just too ridiculous, because the leaner you are, the harder it is to see the differences. The more fat you have to lose, the easier it is to get to until you lose that initial amount of fat. Now it becomes more of an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding that, like, the protocols and the effort that you exhibited to get from A to B is going to have to be intensified to get from B to C, which will then have to be further intensified to get from C to D.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to keep stacking habits and adding layers of complexity and compliance, and adding and removing more and more stuff that's impeding you from getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a very arduous process. And I think that's because it's not really quite enjoyable for people,
Mm-hmm.
but that's because the result hasn't been enjoyed yet. You know, they found themselves in that middle, whereas you and I, we know that at any moment in time, if we decided to dial it in, we could be fucking dick skin lean.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that if we wanted to relax, that, and if we fell backwards, we wouldn't fall that far back. So we have this very tight window that we live in, whereas most people live in this large level of variability that they can't measure or control.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so I feel like, and I would love to get your take on this, I feel like the sweet spot for good coaches, I'm not talking, if a coach is advertising an 8-week challenge and they're going to change your life in 8 or 16 weeks, I think you personally should run the hell away. But I think good coaches, like if you have somebody that has a substantial amount of weight to lose, I mean, not a 300-pound person, but say somebody's 200 pounds, all right? I think the sweet spot starts to happen in about a year from what I have seen in my coaching career. About a year, it's like all of a sudden, all the habits have become a great thing. They're learning more about their body. You're teaching them along the way. And in a year, they're like, I got this. I'm on it. They start to lose weight. All this stuff starts to change. And I literally had a client telling me this the other day. She was like, thank you for just bearing with me, because now I feel like everything is just falling into place. And I was like, no, you did the work, you know, but I feel like the year timeline seems to be the sweet spot.
And then it just comes down to, can we make coaching affordable enough for people to stay in the ecosystem for that long? Can we get them to spend and invest that money in themselves for that long? Because if more coaches started removing that timeline, or making more of a realistic timeline before the person purchased,
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd have a higher barrier to entry into coaching, which would make coaching better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'd have better outcomes from coaching. So the industry in general would be more respected, because right now it's a joke. Like
Mm-hmm.
coaching is viewed as voodoo witchcraft bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
It just is, because there's so many of these fucking functional medicine quacks, or then you got the carnivore people, and then the plant people are yelling at the carnivores, and the carnivores are yelling at the plants. And then the high rep people are yelling at the low rep people, and the power lifters are yelling at the bodybuilders. Everybody's fighting with somebody. And it degrades our knowledge base, because I know some coaches that have brains bigger than any doctor I've ever met. They have brains bigger than any fucking professor I've ever met. They have so much knowledge and help to be able to offer. But the only thing that's missing 99 out of 100 times is the understanding and the support of human psychology. Is what is making Mrs. Jones sit in front of that cupboard at 9 o'clock at night, feeling hopeless, feeling down, feeling alone, and wanting to eat that tin of cookies and then continuously making it, right? The macros and the calorie knowledge won't help her. That's not what she knows. She shouldn't do it. She knows that training makes her feel good. She knows that walking 12,000 steps is good for her. She knows that going to bed at 9 is good. We all, like most of us, know this stuff. And that's what I posted the other day. I said, don't think that you're special because you're a fucking coach who understands insulin resistance. Anybody can Google that shit in 20 minutes.
Right.
What makes you a good coach is if you're able to support that individual in their toughest moments, and then making yourself accessible to them so that they can continually make that good, positive decision and then build on those decisions. That's why it's imperative to not outprice yourself or make it so unreasonable, because the people that have the money probably don't need the help. Like if somebody could afford $600 a month or one of these $1,000 a month programs that people are selling, they probably have everything they need. They just need to be their hands. They need a little hand holding. Versus the people that are actually struggling with health-induced weight gain are the ones that can't afford us and the ones that need us the most. And that's why I want to really that's why I put out an offer. I said, I will give you 6 months of coaching for $1,000.
I saw that.
Just to prove to you that it's not a money problem, nor is it an information problem. It's an accountability and support problem.
100%. Yeah. And I fully agree with that, because I've seen a lot of people do this too, where they also scare the client away. Because, like, for example, I have a shit ton of knowledge in the functional space. Do I always use it? Hell no. Because what am I going to do? This person comes to me, they're already overwhelmed, they're getting into an uncomfortable area, and then I'm like, you got to take 37. I would never put somebody on this, but I'm just like, some of these people are doing this, so I'm just using it as an example. You got to take 37 supplements. You have to do deep breathing 30 times a day. We're only going to go on 20-minute walks, but you have to have your noise canceling headphones with the 240 hertz, I mean, like, this shit's getting insane. And what are you doing when you do this to people? You're setting them up for failure right off the bat, because these poor people, they can't do all this stuff. It's overwhelming enough for them to apply maybe tracking their food and hitting a workout 3 times a week. And you just added 500 things to their already huge list of things to do. Like, why would you do that? And then they feel like a failure and they quit, and boom, they didn't get to their goal.
And you're also majoring in the minors. Like, that's what the problem with like the Hubermans and the Atias is these guys are trying to over communicate and oversell this complicated bullshit of like the way that the sun hits your eyes and the vitamin D conversion into serotonin and blah. Like, Mrs. Jones, who's 190 pounds, who's got a fucking HbA1c of 7, and who's got a fasted insulin or a fasted glucose number of 120 upon waking, doesn't need blue light blocking glasses, and she doesn't need to be rubbing her feet in the grass. She needs to control her fucking diet. She needs to start understanding that portion control and not stuffing stuff down that hole in your mouth is always going to be the easy thing to do. So she's probably has to address mental issues. Am I resilient to stress? Do I have coping mechanisms built in? Am I dealing with childhood trauma? Do I have a good relationship with my spouse? Am I a shitty or ineffective mother, and that's creating a strife between me and my kids, and that's why I'm overeating? Like, most of this stuff doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you've left something undealt with at some point, and now, as a 40-something-year-old woman, you have to come back and revisit that, and that's a really uncomfortable thing to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I mean, I do, there's also a little bit of in the functional space, right? People are like, oh, well, you don't have to do labs. It's not necessary. Well, it isn't necessary, but I also feel that does have some qualities, because you can be like, hey, listen, let's also measure progress based on health markers. Let's get you healthy. Let's get you feeling good, because if you're not healthy and you're not feeling good, you're also going to be a little bit resistant to losing weight. So let's have multiple markers that mark our success beyond just the scale as well. Let's get you feeling good.
Yeah, I have kind of like my 5 non-scale things that I would say are, number 1 is, and these are not in any particular order, but when you could step on a scale and exhibit no emotional reaction to it, that's a big win. Walking into the gym and feeling comfortable inside the weight section and knowing that if like one of the exercises in your program, one of the machines is being used, you know how to be able to pivot and do that same movement with some other implement. That's number 2. Number 3, being able to navigate a restaurant menu without any problems whatsoever. which would go and coincide with number 4, which is learning how to build a plate and knowing that that plate can always be the same thing in any environment, no matter where you are. And then I would say number 5 is being able to go on vacations, go to parties and be on holidays and not have any stress or overwhelm about what the resulting actions are going to turn into from a scale perspective when you come back. So if you can master those 5 things, and if that's those 5 levels of comfort can be instilled into your life, there's no reason why that individual can't manage their weight for a lifetime.
Right. I agree. So let's dive into this a little bit. New Year's is coming. Everybody is ready to start making that change. Where should somebody start? It can seem real overwhelming, and there's a lot of information out there and so many crappy coaches putting bad information out there. What's the best place to start?
I'm going to say just actually, before you do anything, evaluate what you're already doing. Like I want somebody to have an understanding of what their why and what their vision is. Like, why do I want to change? Like if somebody's saying like, I want this change or this transformation to occur, dive deep into where that's coming from and what's driving that feeling. Because I think the reality is my buddy Jeb Stewart Johnston, I don't know if you follow him, but he's big on emotional eating. He's awesome. I'll send you his account once we're done. But Jeb likes to flip conventional coach speak onto its head a little bit. And I know like we always like say stuff like, well, motivation doesn't precede action. Action precedes motivation and blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, motivation is literally the reason why you do something. It's called a motive for a reason. So why do you want to start eating healthier? Is it because you feel like shit? Do you not actually, is your quality of life bad? And I had this conversation with one of my clients today. She works in the healthcare field. She's not a fat person, but she's got fat to lose. She's got a couple underlying health conditions. Her consistency leaves something to be desired, and she admits that. But I asked her, I said, are you unhappy with your quality of life? Like, are you unfulfilled? Are you unhappy in general? And the answer that she gave me was no. I said, so you technically really don't need me. Like, you don't need to pay me $150 a month just for me to review information that you're not even consistently providing to me. So if you walk into January and you can answer that question and say, my quality of life is not bad. I don't suffer from poor energy. I don't have a shitty mood. My digestive health is in a decent spot. My weight is something that doesn't really bother me. I'm relatively strong. Okay. So there's no reason for you to change. Like, just keep doing what you're doing. It's clearly fine for you. If you have some aesthetic endeavor, understand how sacrificial your life is going to have to become. Because your quality of life is not going to improve when you finally reach that target weight. I can promise you that, because the pursuit of getting there hopefully teaches you lessons, but those lessons are only learned over a long period of time. If this is a short intervention, let's say you start in January to look a certain way by June, did those 6 months actually teach you anything about yourself, about your habits, about your wants, your needs, your preferences, what drives you, your motivations, your inspirations, your intrinsic factors? And if the answer to that stuff is no, and you just picked a plan, rode with it, and were successful with it, it's going to unravel after June anyway. So you'll sit in that nice body for a couple of months, then you'll eat and drink yourself right back to where you started by September. And that cycle will repeat, because nothing actually changed inside. Your identity didn't change. You didn't become a fit person. You became a mentally unhealthy, disciplined person, essentially.
Right.
And I want people to really, like, that's why I told people, like, I'm not a fucking fat loss coach. I don't give a shit if you lose weight. What I care about is, like, do you actually understand what you're doing in the gym and why? Do you want to eat to fuel yourself and feel well, and every once in a while have an indulgence because you know it soothes your soul? Can you control yourself in those environments and not go ham? And then if you can't control yourself, do you have an emotional disconnect ability from that decision that you made the next day, so you're not beating yourself up about it? So I would really take a look in the mirror and ask yourself some of these leading hard questions, because if you don't, somebody's going to have to. And if you don't, you're just going to pick a plan out of a box, and you're just going to buy a program, and you're just going to buy another nutrition plan, and you're going to execute until you can't. And then it's going to unravel again, because the person that started that plan hasn't changed yet.
Yeah, and I think, you know how your mess becomes your message, right? That was entirely me, right? I became a very healthy person, eating wonderfully, all the things, happy, felt great. But then I looked in the mirror and I was like, I wanted to look like the people running across the beach in Baywatch, like that's all I could think of from when I was a kid, right? And so I decided I was going to be that person. And I did all the things to be that person. And I remember the more I turned into that person and then I started competing and doing all these things, the more I actually critiqued myself and hated myself. And it became this very mentally unhealthy thing. And I'll never ever forget this. And I say it a lot. And there's probably a post kicking around on Instagram about it. I remember pulling out my shorts out of one of my drawers once from when I used to compete. And I remember going, holy fuck, these things are so little, like they wouldn't even fit on one of my thighs now, right? I was 111 pounds, and everyone's like, wow, you look so amazing. And I hated myself. And I remember pulling those shorts out, and I was like, funny thing is like you think you're gonna get to a certain size and you're gonna be that's the magic size, right? That's a magic body composition. And I remember pulling out these shorts and going, yeah, I hated myself the most when I was this size. And it's funny because I weigh 60 pounds more than that almost now. And I love myself more than ever because of how I feel and how I perform and what I do. And I tell people, like, sometimes it becomes an obsession when you constantly are critiquing yourself and looking in the mirror and it's not good enough. And that's where the mentally unhealthy portion of it comes.
No, it's like with great physique comes great responsibility. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to know how to walk around in that body. It's almost like if like it's like somebody who's not used to having any nice things.
Mm-hmm.
They have some beater car, their apartment looks like shit, there's trash everywhere, and then somebody just hands them a Ferrari and says, cool, take care of this thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, fuck, you can't eat in here, you can't drink in here, I'm taking my shoes off every time I walk in. You almost have so much stress about the upkeep of that new thing you just got, you can't
Mm-hmm.
even enjoy driving it.
Mm-hmm.
So like people, you get to a point where like I'm seeing every ab line, I can see veins in every reflection I walk by. Everybody's giving me compliments, and you're just riding this very artificial high.
Mm-hmm.
And then at any moment, any one thing could just make the house of cards just completely crumble because you're not living in a place that's secure, that feels safe, or that feels like you even belong there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you're rented that body and then you have to give it back at some point.
100%. And I tell people, like, I can relate. I mean, I work with a lot of recovering competitors now, right? It's just become my thing. And I tell them, I'm like, I understand where you're at. When people were constantly like, oh, wow, you're eliciting, you're getting a dopamine hit every single time these people say this, right? And you don't want to let them down by being normal. Like, is it okay to just be normal? Like, you're fit, your muscles show, you're normal, like you don't have to be shocking people walking through the grocery store, like I mean, it's okay. And I'm like, so working with that and realizing that, and I used to think there was an end point too. I'd be like, oh well, I'll get to this level and then I won't have to do this, and there's not. So the harder you're working, the harder you're going to have to keep working, so you got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I asked one of my former clients today because we still keep in touch. And that's the other thing is like a lot of my clients end up becoming very friendly with me because I stopped trying to change them and I allow them the space to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell them, I'm like, I don't care. I do not like, I'm not going to bed with your problems anymore. I used to constantly be under stress because my clients weren't getting results
Mm-hmm.
because it always made me feel like a shitty coach. It made me feel like and that's where the imposter syndrome comes from. And a lot of coaches do beat themselves up about this. And I hear it all the time. And I'm like, listen, as long as you're clear with your expectations, as long as you're clear with your deliverables, as long as both people are on the same page and you did your part,
Mm-hmm.
rest your head at night knowing that you did everything you could do. You cannot fix somebody or change somebody unless they want to be fixed or changed. A lot of women do this with guys, right? A lot of women get into shitty relationships with toxic men because they're trying to baby them and change them, and they're trying to make well, he'll change for me. It's like, no, the fuck he won't. He doesn't want to change. If he was going to change as a 35-year-old man, he would have done it already. And it's not going to be you, magically, princess, that's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we've heard the cliche, the pain of the pain needs to be greater than the pain of the change. That does kind of apply. I think some people do have to naturally hit rock bottom to really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, like tearing my Achilles is a big wake up call. Like I don't want to just be this fucking blockheaded meathead who doesn't move in multiple directions, who can't stand 7 minutes on a football field before he tears his Achilles. I want to be an athletic 40-year-old man who look, and like, I'll never lose my shoulders. I'll never lose my traps. It's not hard to maintain muscle mass once you have it. So like, if you dedicate yourself to building an unbelievable foundation of muscle and strength, maintaining it is fucking easy. It's 3 days a week of full body workouts with an RP of 8 and some decent nutritional control, and you're there, you're good. So it's like people want to achieve and then they completely backpedal. Whereas for me, like, I want to just keep like slowly, incrementally layering little things, changing some stuff around, changing the reason why I do things. Like right now, I like being in San Diego is hard because you're surrounded by a lot of bodybuilders here. There's a big bodybuilding, but it's more of a, it's not like a competitive science-based fun bodybuilding community. It's a very aesthetic, showy, douchey bodybuilding community. So a lot of people here have this psychology of like, I have to keep up with the Joneses. So it's like, I have to have my body like this year round. And we just know that that's unrealistic. You're not going to be, 12% as a woman 365 days a year unless you want to kill yourself.
Well, I mean, they can maintain there's plenty of people that will be like, oh, well, I maintain it, but for how long? Lots of these people are super young or early in their journey. I say you can only have the gas pedal hammered to the ground so long before you crash.
Yeah, or what are the psychological repercussions? What are the physiological repercussions from being that lean for that long? And then just like, are you actually happy? Like, are you doing things in your life that are fulfilling you? Like, I have so many people that I talk to on the phone, and it's just like dread and misery and like, oh, how you doing? Oh, just getting by. Like, you don't have a fucking calorie problem. You have a mental issue that needs to be dealt with. You need counseling. You need to find a purpose in life. Like, if the only reason why you hired a coach was to like get skinny for fucking Cancun 3 months from now, you're still going to be a twat when you get back from Cancun. You're still going to be a miserable human being when you get back because you haven't changed who you are.
Right.
And that's going to trickle into your relationships with your peers. It's going to trickle down into how you deal with your children, into how you deal with your loved ones, and how you show up in the world. So the weight has nothing to do with it. It's got, I mean, I know plenty of women that are 200 pounds overweight and they're fine. Like the Lizzos of the world, like, happy as clams, making money, enjoying their life, singing their brains out, eating fucking barbecue every 3 hours, and they don't give a shit. But they're also not the ones who are complaining about how they look and feel because they're happy, on the inside. It's the ones that are just constantly looking for this extrinsic validation of who they are. They need to have, like, somebody has to tell me I'm pretty or else I'm not going to be pretty.
Right.
Somebody has to tell me I matter or else I don't matter. It's like, well, if you keep looking for that, that's all you're ever going to want.
Right.
As opposed to seeking it for yourself and finding out from the inside out who you are, what do you want, and why you're here.
I think this is a huge thing to consider too when you're getting into your journey. Like you said, find out your why. Like, what is it? So I guess another thing you brought up, being able to eat at a restaurant and find the good things on the menu. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I used to spend a lot of time in the Midwest. I mean, you're not really you're on the West Coast, but you're in the Northwest, which doesn't really count. So you're essentially in the Midwest.
I'm hiding up there by Canada.
Yeah. So any of your big chain restaurants are always a good go-to. Like, let's say, like, your Applebee's, your Outback, your Texas Roadhouse, those national chain brands, great places to eat. Cheesecake Factory, great place to eat because you can customize anything. You can tell them, I'm allergic to dairy, soy, gluten, wheat, everything. You tell them the laundry list and they will literally just bring you a piece of chicken on top of rice because they don't want to get sued. They don't want you to get fucked up. Like, they are going to do whatever they can do to not keep their brand status high. Not going to happen at a mom and pop restaurant where, like, you stop in Missouri and on the road and you're like, I want three hard-boiled eggs and 2 egg whites and a little, like, they'll be like, fuck you, go get it yourself. So if you have trouble eating out, understand that, like, if you just order off the menu as is, you're going to be exposed to all sorts of calories because there's so much fat in that food that they're using oil with that you have no idea how to quantify. You have to be, number one rule at a restaurant is you have to be open and willing to make accommodations to something that you want. If your intention is to replicate how you would eat at home.
Mhm.
Now, if your expectation of a restaurant is I'm going to come here and enjoy exactly what they offer, then you don't need to make any accommodations, but you also have to be responsible for what you eat.
Mhm.
So if you go into an Outback Steakhouse and you eat the onion loaf, and then you have the fried shrimp, and then you have the steak with the nasty shit on the potatoes, and then you have the dessert, how you feel afterwards is your responsibility, because that's what you chose. But you could also walk into that restaurant and choose to lighten things up a little bit. You can get just the baked potato with nothing on it. You can get the steak that's grilled and hopefully with no oil and no butter. And you can tell them that.
Mhm.
You can get no appetizer. You can get cocktail shrimp instead of fried shrimp. So there are and then you can just skip the dessert. Or like
Mhm.
if you're somebody who likes dessert, skip the cocktail and get the dessert.
Yes.
So there's
Yes.
ways to like accommodate and find ways to reduce calories. Now, are you still going to be able to make progress if you make all those decisions? It's yet to be determined, because the
Mhm.
reality is going out to eat should be an escape.
Mhm.
Like and again, I've talked about this multitudes of times. Like I used to go out to eat when I was a kid with my family, maybe once every 3 to 6 months.